Hey, this is we're third week now, fourth week. Be sure to sign in at your tables. We're still making sure we get the table assignments all set up. And if you're new or newer, some of these are still fluid. So please be sure you fill those attendance sheet out, and we want to keep track of that. If you're new, please register, and you can jump at the back table with John. You can take care of the registration if you need to. Pastor Brian and his wife Lorene they finished their last day in Spain yesterday, and they're heading home, I believe, tonight. So he'll be back with you next week. He's excited about that. It's been a long whirlwind tour. Maybe you'll get a nice slideshow next week for Team with their travels. We're excited about that, to have him back as well. All right, ready for the joke? This was in the book that Brian gave me, so I blame him entirely. Unless it's good, then it's mine. Teacher said to his class one day, "Please stand up, anyone who thinks they are dumb." Nobody stood. And the teacher said, "I'm sure there's some student in this class who thinks they might be dumb." After a long pause, little Johnny stood up. The teacher said, "Oh, Johnny, do you think you're dumb?" Johnny replied, "No, teacher, I just felt bad that you were standing all by yourself." Yes, good, there we go, all right. Well, we're looking at turning points, as you know. Turning points, the decisions in a man's life, key moments in our lives. And sometimes I think we know these things best in the rearview mirror. We look back and realize what a key moment that was in our lives. So far, we've seen the decisions that produced pain and destruction. Adam's turning point in the garden, and Cain's turning point, and last week, Abraham, his decision to obey God. Today, we're going to stay in Genesis, but we're jumping way ahead all the way to the chapter 39, the story of a man named Joseph. Let me summarize for you the early part of Joseph's life, in case you're not as familiar with the Old Testament. Joseph is the youngest of 12 brothers. He's the son of a man named, anybody know? You should know this, even if you know the musical, right? Jacob. Jacob is from an archetypal dysfunctional family. Jacob was the younger brother of two, Esau and Jacob. And his father, Isaac, favored Esau, the red hairy one, and his mother, Rachel, favored Jacob. And that favoritism got those boys in trouble. Jacob's story is really interesting. You read that in Genesis 31, 32. But here in 39, Jacob now has 12 sons, the youngest of which is Joseph, and Joseph is favored by Jacob. Jacob ought to have known better, but he favored, to the point of real trouble and rivalry. And in the ancient world, it's a patriarchal society, the youngest brother, youngest son, was the least. The oldest son was the favored son. Even in terms of legal matters and inheritance, the youngest was lowest, not just in age, but in terms of significance in the family. But Joseph is favored, and his brothers hate him for it. And he has a series of dreams where God is speaking to him about his position and what God's going to do through him and in the family. But he doesn't handle it well. He's kind of immature, a little bit cocky and arrogant, and not very wise. And he tells his brothers about these dreams, which only sort of serves to magnify their dislike for him. And they plot to kill him. But one of their brothers, Reuben, sort of talks him out of it. They end up throwing him in a pit. Then they see a caravan coming and think, "Hey, let's not leave him in the pit to die. We get no money for that. There's nothing in it for us." They drag him out of the pit, and they sell him into slavery. And they slaughter a wild animal, dip his coat in the blood to sort of fool their dad into thinking that their poor little brother was caught and killed by a wild animal. So it's a bit of a PG-13 story, Joseph's early life. Anyway, so we're going to pick up this movie clip from 1993 miniseries about this story where Joseph is now, it's what happens after he's sold into slavery, and it's part of the story. So we'll watch this, and we'll pick up the story in the text itself.
Oh, Potiphar, what took you so long? Didn't my maid tell you of the pain I'm in?
Yes, of course she did. Of course, my love, but the Pharaoh has first call. All his chief steward's time as well, you know. Anyway, I'm here now. And we'll right any wrong that has been done.
I was alone. And he came here. He came to my chamber.
On what excuse?
That's exactly what I said. He just laughed at me. He said he needed no excuse. that he was your chief steward, and that I had to do what he said, or it would be the worse for me. He grabbed my arms, forced himself upon me. I screamed and I pushed him away, and I scratched wildly at him.
You scratched him?
Yes, with the power of the goddess Bastet with me, I drove him out.
I see.
I want the full measure of the law, husband. The full measure. I want his death.
Go, leave me with the slave. Come. I thought I could trust you.
But you can, Master.
If anyone approaches, keep your hands behind you.
Thank you, Master.
Now explain yourself.
How, Master?
She accuses you of the vilest crime, Joseph, and demands the full measure of the law in vengeance, which means your head.
And a man guilty of that crime would deserve nothing less.
So you deny it?
Yes, of course. But who would believe a slave pleading for his life?
I deserve better than that from you. I've treated you more like a son than a slave. Trusted my entire estate to you, made you the law of my house in my absence. You, a slave!
But your lands prospered under my hand.
Which is why I'd rather not see you dead. Take me years to find another like you. Is there nothing you can say in your defense?
Only if you allow me to speak openly. As though I were a free man.
So be it. But on this occasion only, and no one must ever know I allowed you such a liberty.
You know you can trust me. I would never betray you, not after all the goodness you've shown me.
Wouldn't you call forcing yourself on my wife a betrayal?
Of course I would. And I repeat, I would never betray you.
You're saying my wife's a liar.
That's not my place, Master. But whatever happened to her was not by my hand. I could not do such a thing.
No, you couldn't. It goes against everything I've ever seen in you. By all the gods, why this now? When things are going so well for my house. Give me a reason to believe you. When the blood runs hot, a man forgets his acts have consequences.
I have seen the evil that comes from rape. It is hateful to me, and an abomination in the eyes of God.
Tell me more. Tell me more. Give me a way of proving this isn't the way of a man like you.
These are old memories, Master. Thoughts of a better time before my slavery. And thoughts of a great pain.
If you value your life, Joseph, you'll share them with me.
I realize that clip is a little bit Bible-y, but that mini-series, we talked about even showing the clip before where Joseph is seduced by Potiphar's wife, played by Ben Kingsley there. But it was a little PG-13, even more so for the morning, so you can go watch that on your own. But Joseph is sold by this caravan of Ishmaelites into the house of an Egyptian royal military noble named Potiphar. And it says captain of the guard in the text, but he has a position of more like military commander over that region. And he rises to power in his house in charge of almost everything. And we'll pick up the story in chapter 39, verses 1 to 23. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he's entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and one of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story. "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me and to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. This is a really fascinating story. Perhaps you know some of it. It's one of the things that I like about the Bible, the scriptures, is that it includes such earthy stories. You've got here sort of like an ancient cougar attacking or seducing this man in the house. Joseph ends up by divine providence in the house of a military official. We talked about Potiphar, and he rises in his service so that the guy has nothing to worry about. Joseph handles all the financial details, all the administrative details, all the running of his estate. And he would have been a wealthy man, many servants, a lot going on. This is a big position. I think the first thing I want to mention to you before we get to the fill-ins is that there's a contrast here in the use of power. Potiphar's wife, she's married to a very high-ranking official in the Egyptian army. She's a position of power. But how does she use her position of power? She uses her position to try to seduce this young man. And you can see it, right? I mean, this is like Hollywood. He's handsome and attractive and well-built. Her husband's gone all the time, maybe doesn't pay much attention to her, treats her like a possession. And she's bored. And she's lonely. And he's good-looking. And she's in a position of power. He belongs to her husband. Even though he's in a high position, he's still a slave. He's still owned by her husband. And so she seduces him, or tries to. And in fact, the words, "come to bed with me," with an exclamation point in the text, in the English translation, in Hebrew, it's actually two words. And it's much more of it's not a suggestion, it's a command. It'd be like sex now. It's closer to an accurate English translation is what she's saying to him. She's commanding him. Some of you guys are I love the awkward laugh. Yes. That's a better translation of what's being said in Hebrew. Now look at how Joseph contrasts that. How does Joseph use his position of power? He's also in a position of power. He uses his not to demand his way, not to demand what he believes are his rights, not to have what he wants, but to do what? To bless someone else, the one he serves. He uses the position that he's in not to get what he wants, but to bless the person he's serving, his master. That's we'll come back to that, but I want you to see that. And this is a pattern we'll see in Joseph's life over and over again. The first thing there after that is the raw deal. Number one, a raw deal. Joseph is unjustly accused of rape. When I had a chance it's a number of years ago now, but on a couple of different occasions to go to Angola in Louisiana, state prison there. It's the largest state penitentiary in our country. 6,000 inmates, it's 18,000 acres. It's larger than Manhattan. It's a working farm. There's 6 different 1,000 inmate camps. Louisiana has the toughest sentencing laws in the nation. So a third violent felony is by definition life sentence in Louisiana is by definition without possibility of parole. I was there working with with a ministry called Malachi Dads to help some of these guys who were trying to be fathers on the inside better than they were on the outside. Anyway, everybody in there is professing their innocence. And you don't know, and the chaplain told us, they're all going to tell you they didn't do it, especially those that we met that are in solitary or that were on death row. And it was a bit of a sobering experience. However, I did meet some men whose lives have been totally transformed by the gospel, and they were the ones who freely said, no, this is who I was, and this is who I am now. I'm totally guilty. And I met a couple of guys who were in that category of men that have been transformed by Christ, who said, no, actually, I didn't commit this crime. But you don't know, right? Is that still something God's working out in their life? Are they unable to admit their guilt? Well, about a year after I had been there, got an email from Chaplain Tony, who told us of a story of one of the guys that I had met, who, because of some recent changes in the evidence, was released. 23 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit as a 19-year-old boy. And now he's released. 23 years, and he's out. I read recently about a man named Daryl Pinkins who spent 25 years behind bars, released from prison just recently in time for his daughter's 26th birthday. Now 63 years old, 38 when a jury convicted him in 1989 of gang rape being a woman in Gary, Indiana. Pinkins, a father of 4 and steel mill worker, was leaving work in 1989 to cash checks on his payday with his good friend Roosevelt Glenn. He said his car broke down, the two went to get help. When they returned, they claimed their coveralls were stolen from inside the vehicle, but they had no other defense, and 25 years in prison. Joseph is accused falsely, and the movie didn't show it, and we didn't read all of it yet, but he goes to prison. The movie portrays Ben Kingsley as sympathetic to Joseph's case. Like, I know I can trust you, but I can't call my wife a liar, you're a slave, in this culture I can't do that. Perhaps that's how Potiphar was. It's much more likely that this man is still property. This is the ancient world. He owned this man. Even though he trusted him, he still belongs to him, and he would have been pretty harsh with him. It's a raw deal. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, the Egyptian, who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. He had a raw deal to begin with. His brothers sold him. A caravan sold him. Potiphar owned him, falsely accused. This is a man, I think, who you could excuse if he was a little bitter at life or bitter at God. I mean, we could probably say he's had a harder go than I've had. And I would understand if he was a little jaded. But the second thing we see is an unlikely success. Look at verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw the Lord was with him and the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. What do you notice about this text? It's pretty obvious. It's all over this story and all over the story of Joseph's life if you read it in its entirety in the Old Testament. God was with him. It's all over that, right? God's blessing him. God's with him. But just hold on a minute. What does it mean for God to be with him? Do you see all those references? God with Joseph? But isn't this a guy who was also sold into slavery, plotted to be murdered by his brothers, ends up a possession in an Egyptian's house outside the family of God? How is it that God's with him if this is all happening to him, right? If God being with him doesn't mean protection from slavery and false accusation and brothers hating you, then what does God with him mean? Hold on to that thought, because I think it's important in Joseph's life and in ours as well. There's an unlikely success story here. God blesses Joseph, whatever that means, we'll come back to it. And in so doing, he blesses this Egyptian man's house. But I think for you men, God being with you and you being with God, wherever you go to work, the places you're going to go from here, your employment, the people that you employ or work with or work for or are surrounded by, God's put you there not just for your own benefit to bless your family, but by virtue of your relationship with him to impact that environment. Joseph becomes a gift to Potiphar's house, and Potiphar trusts him. It's a repeated theme in his life. He's going to end up in prison and then rises to prominence in the prison. The guard can trust him. He's going to end up interpreting dreams, and then Pharaoh sends for him because one of the men in prison who Joseph helps get out goes to Pharaoh's court and says, I know a guy who can interpret dreams. And he ends up number 2 in Egypt, and God uses that to rescue his whole family and the people of God. This repeated pattern of Joseph facing misfortune, which God uses for his purposes. Psalm 37:4, it's not in your little notes there, but Psalm 37:4 says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And I've talked to lots of people who view that this way. Delight yourself in the Lord, whatever that means, and then God gives you the stuff you want. Because I have desires in my heart, I have plans and dreams for my life, I want to do certain things, and so if I delight myself in the Lord, go to church, be a good Christian, do good Christian-y stuff, then God will bless my desires. That's not what it means. Maybe it means, well, I have desires in my heart, some of them good and God-honoring, some of them not so good, and so if I delight myself in the Lord, then he'll sort that out. He'll get rid of the bad desires and give me the good desires that I already have, make those come true. That's a better interpretation, but I still don't think it's what it means. I think what the psalmist is saying is, delight yourself in the Lord, want him, and that becomes the desire of your heart, and that's what he gives you. So what does it mean that the Lord was with Joseph? It clearly doesn't mean that his life was smooth sailing, does it? It clearly doesn't mean that everything went well, and we tend to evaluate our lives that way, don't we? Where's God because I lost my job? Where's God because my boss is an idiot? Where's God because my kids are making terrible decisions and my wife is acting like, whatever where you fill in the blank. And we evaluate how we think, God's not with me, my life's not going well. God is with Joseph, the text tells us, and his life's not going well on the surface of it at all. But that's precisely the point. God with us is not a means to our end. It's not a way to get what you want in life. It's not a guarantee that there's no hardship or difficulty or tragedy or sadness or unfairness. What it means is, in the midst of hard stuff in life, God is with him, and God uses those things in ways that he couldn't possibly have imagined to accomplish his purposes. Where are we in the outline? I don't know what, number 2? Number 3? It doesn't really matter. Number 4? An unexpected opportunity. An unexpected opportunity. Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. I told you what that really means there. Joseph could have easily rationalized, look, after all I've been through, after all I've suffered, after all I've endured, hey, I deserve a little fun. He's never going to know, she's never going to tell, he's not around. This, by the way, is the turning point. This confrontation, this repeated temptation, and then finally when she grabs him when nobody's around. That moment. It doesn't always come to us that way in the form of a seductive woman who grabs you. I hope that doesn't happen very often to you. But it comes to us, no less. The turning point of temptation. Which way are we going to go? Which way are we going to choose? He doesn't do that. Why not? What would you do if you knew nobody would find out? How would you behave if there was an absolute rock-solid guarantee your wife and your boss and your friends would never know? Last point, there is a man of integrity. A man of integrity. Now, the word integrity is an interesting English word. It comes from the root word integer. Those of you that are into math will know that an integer is a whole number, not a fraction, right? Literally, it means a whole person, not a fractioned person, not a divided person. So a whole person, not a divided heart, in other words. What does that mean? to have an undivided heart or soul. Notice what the temptation is. If you look at verse 9, no one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you because you're his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against my master? No, what does it say? How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against who? You can say it out loud. God. I think this is the key to who Joseph is and what's going on in his life. He does mention Potiphar. He does say he's been gracious to me. He does say he's put me in a position of influence. He does say he's trusted me. He does know that I don't want to break his confidence. But ultimately speaking, his concern is not with breaking Potiphar's trust, is it? It's with violating God. You know, in Psalm 51, the story of David and Bathsheba, David, if you don't know the story, David was Israel's greatest king, and he's committed some pretty heinous crimes. He's slept with another man's wife and gotten her pregnant, and then he's had that man, Uriah, who was the captain of his guard, murdered by putting him on the front lines of a battle. So adultery and murder, pretty high on the list of not good choices. When David is confronted and convicted of his sin, and he breaks over it, in Psalm 51, in verses 3 and 4, he says, against you and you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, which is a little strange if you think about it. Against you only, God? What about Uriah? You sinned against him. What about Bathsheba, his wife? You sinned against her. David's not saying there aren't earthly consequences and those people don't matter. What he's saying is ultimately speaking, guys, every offense is not a horizontal offense. It's a vertical offense. Ultimately speaking, that's our first allegiance. That's the secret to Joseph's integrity. Because earthly allegiances eventually will be broken. Eventually, enough pressure, enough time will break these promises, unless this one holds fast. That's the secret to who Joseph is as a man, his faithfulness to God, his sense of there's more at stake here than just Potiphar in his house. I mean, Joseph could have rationalized this and said, this guy's a pagan. He's not an Israelite. He's not a member of the family of God. God doesn't even like the Egyptians. They're evil. I have every right to disobey him. And a command from a corrupt and pagan master is no command worth following. He could have rationalized all that, but he didn't. God put me here. God's raised me up to this position. It's God I'd be violating. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, Paul tells us, flee all sexual temptation. I think he's referring back to this story. Because what does Joseph do when she grabs him finally? You can see it, like she's getting irritated. I can't win this guy over? Maybe it had worked every other time before in her life. So she grabs him, and he leaves her his cloak in her hand and runs. Runs out. That's instructive for us too, I think. Do you run? And if you do, which direction? When that moment comes. In that same passage in 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul says, you are not your own. You were bought with a price. Therefore, honor God with your body. I remember sitting over breakfast with a guy who used to be in team. He's moved away now. Who was really battling. He was at a turning point. He was at a crossroads, really battling some decisions in his life, some decisions he had made and some he was on the verge of making. And I didn't plan to say this, but over breakfast, I just quoted that passage kind of from memory with him. I said, man, you're not your own. You don't get to decide that. You've been bought by Christ. You belong to him. He put his fork down and stared at me and didn't say anything, but a week later told me it was that word from God's word that redirected him. Thinking, in other words, I don't belong to me. The myth in our culture is that I'm my own man, I make my own way, I make my own decisions, I decide, I lead. We're not. We're dependent creatures. We belong to him. If you know Jesus Christ, he's ransomed you, bought you. You're his. You don't get to decide purely on your own. And I think that's what it means when it says God was with him, because Joseph was with God. Real self-control does not come by us looking inward to try and control our desires. Willpower. I mean, you can do that to a degree. You can get in the gym, you can create a new habit, you can change one by sheer force of willpower. But real heart transformation, real self-control doesn't come, I don't think, by us looking inside and saying, I'm going to control myself. I'm going to rein in these desires. Joseph, when at the moment of truth, in verse 11 and 12, he doesn't look inward, does he? Where does he look? Upward. He doesn't look inward to rein in his desire for Potiphar's wife or sort of say, not this time, come on, be strong, Joseph. He looks up to God. That's where I think for the Christian, real self-control comes there, looking to God, not self. In that moment, Joseph says, wait a minute. I know that she's really attractive, and I know that I could probably get away with this, and I know that but there's more going on here than I see. There's more at stake here than I see. There's my relationship with God at stake. He's blessed me. He's protected me. He's brought me this far. And you think that a guy who does that, here's the irony of the story, which I think is important for us in our culture. A guy who does that, right? Well, what would you think? How would you think God would handle a man who's faithful, repeatedly faithful, who resists temptation, who honors God, who's honest? How would God treat that man? Bless him? Well, what would blessing look like? Well, probably not unjustly accused of rape and go to jail, right? Would you expect, if I told you, if you honor God, if you're faithful to God, if you do what God asks, you're probably going to get falsely accused and end up in prison. That's not a good selling point for a pastor, right? Hey, sign up. That's what happens. That's what happens in his life. We must not evaluate our lives based on our sense of fairness or what we deserve. We must not evaluate God's goodness based on our sense of what we deserve, what we think it should be coming to us in our lives. We don't deserve anything from his hand. This is contrary to how I think we're wired to think in our culture. God owes you nothing based on you, your character and attributes and value and service and worth. God owes you nothing, but he's given you everything in Christ, everything. Ransomed your life from death, saved you, brought you into his kingdom. And on top of that, he's given you wives and children and families and careers and jobs. It's like this too, God? So when something comes in our lives that we think, this is not right, why is this happening to me? What are you tempted to do? Shake your fist at God? Or to say, God, you've already given me everything. I'll trust you in the midst of this. I'm not going to abandon you in the midst of this. Because God has bigger plans for Joseph. Wish we had time to go through the rest of his story. We don't, because he has much bigger plans for where Joseph is headed and how he's going to use him, even though it's going to get worse before it gets better. All right, we'll stop there because we have some good questions to ask and answer here around your tables. We've got one, I believe, listed. Let me give you a couple more to think through and talk through. First, have you ever been unjustly accused of something that you didn't do or was not your fault? Number two, you can jot this one down if you want. How are you tempted to doubt the goodness of God based on circumstances in your life? How are you tempted to doubt the goodness of God? Is it up there? Oh, you already have number two. It's not in my book. Number two, where's your integrity most likely to be most tested today? And then number three, where are you tempted to doubt the goodness or fairness of God in your life based on circumstances? Talk about those things together, and then we'll come back up and wrap up in prayer.